Tet Offensive took place on January 30th, 1968, about 3 years after the first American troops started fighting in Vietnam. The Northern Vietnamese, known as the Viet Cong, held surprise attacks all up and down southern Vietnam, including the American Embassy and the city of Hue, during what was thought to be a ceasefire during the Vietnamese New Year.
After they drove the French out of Vietnam in 1954, their country was split into a north and a south as a result of a conflict between communism and Western capitalism. Communism is the idea that everything you own is owned by the community or state as well. Western capitalism is an economic system that is based on the private ownership of capital goods and the creation of goods and service for profit. The North had already decided that they were for communism and was mainly aided by the Soviet Union and Red China. It was controlled by President Ho Chi Minh. The communist-led guerrilla soldiers fighting in the South were known as the Viet Cong.
The South had not yet decided whether it was going to become communist. South Vietnam was seen as a key country in the domino theory. The domino theory was that if one country fell to communism, then more would follow. The South was controlled by President Ngo Dinh Diem. The US was against communism as well, so instead of attacking the Soviet Union directly, they decided to support South Vietnam and prevent the domino effect. President John F. Kennedy first sent 400 troops to train the Southern Vietnamese. In 1965, President Johnson sent 3,500 US Marines not just to train the Southern Vietnamese, but to fight the Viet Cong.
I was very supportive of the war in Vietnam. I thought it was the right thing to do to fight the communists.
A main attack point during the Tet Offensive was the American Embassy. 19 Viet Cong, armed with M16s, rocket launchers, and explosives, blasted a hole in the reinforced concrete fence surrounding the embassy. They had been planning this attack for the past 6 months, and their purpose was to destroy the embassy. The Viet Cong never actually got into the building because the Marines were able to hold them off. In the end, all but one Viet Cong was killed in the skirmish.
The general in charge of the U.S. troops during the Vietnam War was William C. Westmoreland. He was appointed commander of MACV and all U.S. troops fighting in the Vietnam War in June 1964. In 1967, President Johnson took an unprecedented step by calling back Westmoreland to the U.S. Johnson wanted Westmoreland to tell the American public and Congress that the U.S. was winning the war and there was light at the end of the tunnel.
Back that home by resolve, confidence, patience, determination, and continued support, we will prevail in Vietnam over the communist aggressor.
After the attack on the embassy, General Westmoreland was interviewed by the American press.
In my opinion, this is diversionary to his main effort, which he had planned to take place in Quang Tri province. This attack has not yet materialized. His schedule has probably been thrown off balance because of our very effective airstrikes.
He did not make the whole picture clear in his interview because the attack was actually considered a major military action. General Westmoreland misled the public about many other things in the Vietnam War as well. He assured Americans they were winning the war when they really weren't, and he did not give accurate information about the enemy troop count.
I was pretty well self-indoctrinated to the left, so Westmoreland was like the devil, as far as I was concerned. He was pretty ruthless and, but he was kind of just doing his job.
I did not like General Westmoreland. I thought he was there for his personal glory.
The city of Hue was the only city that was completely occupied by communist forces during the Tet Offensive. Violent fighting took place there from January 31st to February 25th, 1968. The North planned to liberate the whole city but completely failed because the citizens were solidly with the Americans and Southern Vietnamese. After 26 days of fighting, neither side could come away as victors.
The North Vietnamese were very informed, and they were very good soldiers, and they had perfected guerrilla tactics, and for the most part they were well armed.
Not knowing where they are, that's the worst thing. Riding around and running the sewers and the gutters anywhere, be anywhere. Just hope you can stay alive from day to day. I just want to go back home and go to school. That's about it.
You lost any friends?
Quite a few. We lost one the other day. The whole thing stinks.
How would you compare it to other places that you've served in Vietnam?
Well, this is the worst I've something that you just, most of the time you can't get anything done because there's too much incoming. You can't get out much at all. It's just too dangerous to get out.
Saigon was kind of a sanctuary, so when it got hit and attacked, it really brought to light that we were vulnerable.
The Vietnam War was the first war that was broadcasted live and nightly to every American home. Before Tet, the Americans were supportive of the war efforts against communism, but were less supportive when they viewed what was actually going on in Vietnam.
How long have you been fighting in Saigon?
It's broke out about 6-7 days ago. I've been fighting ever since then.
You've been fighting out in the field, too?
Right.
Which do you prefer?
Field.
Why?
I don't know. You can't find them around here.
They also thought the war was only fought in the jungle and not in populated areas. The Vietnam War became more and more unpopular in America as more lies were revealed.
I think there was a growing anti-war sentiment that seemed to be spreading pretty rapidly, but it really didn't take off until the Tet Offensive made it very evident that this was a war that wasn't working for us. That there was a chance we could lose. There was a chance that we weren't going to gain anything from it, and particularly in that offensive, we're losing a lot of our good young men.
I hated the protesters at that time, but now that I've been educated, I understand their beliefs, and I probably would have been in their ranks had I had the knowledge now.
The Tet Offensive was a turning point in the Vietnam War because it forever changed the perception of the American public. War protest increased. People began to realize that winning the war was impossible without losing many more lives, and that peace should be negotiated. All of this resulted in President Lyndon B. Johnson deciding not to run for re-election.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Walter Cronkite was an influential reporter during the Vietnam War. He was broadcasted nightly, and the Americans back home could trust him for accurate accounts and information. Following Tet, Cronkite visited Vietnam and later on the evening news gave his personal assessment of the war.
To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion.
After President Johnson had watched that telecast live, he shut off the television and said, "If I've lost Cronkite, then I've lost Middle America." People between the ages of approximately 14 and 30 took to the streets in protest. They were enraged towards the government, and the protests grew larger every year. As a result, the U.S. government slowly started pulling troops out of Vietnam. It took 5 long years to pull all of the troops out, but the fighting was eventually left to the North and South Vietnamese. All in all, it was a wake-up call to the American people that the war was pointless and the U.S. troops needed to be withdrawn as soon as possible.
By 1975, the North claimed victory and still control the country of Vietnam to this day. Over 3 million people were killed in the war, with more than half of them being innocent civilians. About 2.7 million American soldiers served in Vietnam, with over 58,000 casualties.
The Tet Offensive was not only a turning point in the Vietnam War, but it forever changed the way Americans thought about involvement in future conflicts.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side.